Thanks for joining me here at the Real Rescue Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. I'm psyched because this episode is brought to us by Bell, Above and Beyond Flight. Explore what they're doing in aviation today at bellflight.com. Now it's time to relaunch part 2 with my man, Dave Callen. My name is Jason Quinn. I am United States Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer number 500. These are my rescues and rescues from those of us that put our lives on the line every day so others may live. This is the Real Rescue Podcast. Dave, so one of the other things that I really like about some of your stories that you've told me is you actually are a survivor of two kind of, well, one crash for sure, and then one, like, let's call it landing because you had to. Takeoff is optional, landing mandatory.
Mandatory.
So
Yeah.
what's up? And it's, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, this was not on a search and rescue. This wasn't anything like that. You were out on patrol or trying to help ground units and whatnot, and then an incident happened. Now, here's the reason I even want to bring this up is because there's a lot of lessons learned, and for those of us that fly, it's good to hear this stuff so that you can relate it when you're in the air the next time. So that's why I'm asking you to bring these up.
Yeah. So, and yeah, I'm happy to share those incidents with you. So, yeah, you're right. Both times that happened, it was flying patrol in Vegas. Just me and another officer that was a TFO or a tactical flight officer doing the police mission. And the first time, geez, I don't remember the year. I'd have to look in my logbook. But the first time it happened, I had taken off. It was daytime, and I was training Dave Brooks. Actually, he was fairly new to the unit, and Dave wasn't even a pilot yet. He wasn't even in flight training. He was in TFO training, and he was probably, I don't know, maybe 2/3 of the way through it, something like that. And I was fairly low time in the unit as well, as far as experience. You know, people generally, in Vegas, unless you have at least a couple thousand hours, it's like, this is a new guy. But I don't know. I probably had, I don't know, 600-700 hours, something like that. Maybe I'd have to look, but yeah, just flying daytime patrol, and we were bouncing around handling calls for service. And I was in a 500 in both of these incidents. Was in an F model 500. That's what we flew patrol in, and they still do out there. So the funny thing about this story is my wife Ashley is an air traffic controller, and it was kind of common when our kids were very little. We had to work opposite schedules to make that work, and occasionally we would overlap, and I would end up talking to her when she was in the tower. It used to be McCarran, now it's Harry Reid International Airport, but she worked in the tower up there, and they're super busy, and there's a helicopter frequency. So when there's all these helicopters, tours, canning guys, all that stuff, they put all the helicopters on one frequency. So she happens to be on helicopter frequency working, and I'm talking to my wife, which, that's pretty, probably count on one hand how many people do that. But so I had Brooks with me, and we had just handled a call over the strip. We went west, and one of the things that we would do with the new TFOs is during our downtime, we would quiz them on streets, because these guys had to memorize the main streets and the 100 blocks for those streets for the entire Vegas Valley. So we were just kind of cruising southwest and just turn the computer off so you can't cheat, and just asking them, hey, what's this street in 100 block? What's this street in 100 block? We're just cruising along, asking them some of the smaller ones. So we get towards this intersection of Spring Mountain and Jones, which is like southwest part of Vegas, and we're not quite there yet. We're kind of coming up it. We're straddling this smaller road called Twain, and so everything's fine. We're probably, I don't know, maybe an hour and 15 minutes into this flight, and just cruising along 500 feet above the ground, 60 knots. That was standard patrol altitude and speed for patrol at the time, and just out of nowhere, not accelerating, decelerating, no power changes, nothing. It just rolls to idle. And at the time, I thought it flamed out. Later on in hindsight, it did not. We had a governor failure that actually caused the engine to roll all the way down to idle, which if you're training and practicing auto rotations, that's how you simulate it. You just chop the throttle to idle. And the thing is not going to fly at all. But it's when it happens, you really don't know. So we're cruising along, and all of a sudden it just rolls down. And so I'm like, shit. I didn't say it this time. I didn't say shit. I thought shit, but I didn't say it. But so immediately I enter an auto, and we're descending, and we're flying kind of southwest bound, and I made an initial right turn of about, I don't know, 30 degrees, and lined up with this road called Twain. And I actually got on the radio, and there's radio traffic of this too. I could upload it to you. But
Yeah, heck yeah.
Mike and I, we were flying Air 5 at the time. So I don't know how or why. I don't even remember doing it, but I keyed up the mic and I said to my wife, I'm like, Tower Metro 5, we're going down. And that was all I could get out. So we line up on Twain, and as we're descending, there's some wires in the way. And I'm like, shit, we're going to pretty much, go right where these wires are. So that's not going to work. So we made another more aggressive 90-degree right turn to line up on a street called Lindell. And that intersection of Twain and Lindell it was a four-way stop. So there's like these extending light poles with flashing lights, to basically advise everybody it's a four-way stop. So we make that turn, and we're descending now north on Lindell. And there was a car that was just in front of us, and that dude's cruising northbound to the next light, which is Spring Mountain. And that street is basically 2 lanes with a center turn lane with the little, bot dot center lane dividers. So as we come down, I could hear Dave was getting some radio traffic out because he's talking to the police dispatcher, and I'm talking to the tower. And I'm monitoring. I just hear words. So I'm totally overloaded, dude, at this point. And
Oh
I
my
can
God,
tell you,
dude.
it's funny because, in training, Metro has an outstanding emergency procedures training, and especially back then, it was top notch. Internally, the CFIs would do just absolutely outstanding auto rotation training with us, and then we would go to Western Helicopters, which unfortunately went out of business a few years ago, but we would train with those guys annually as well in their 500, and they gave, honestly, the guys from Western. Pete and Bob gave me the stuff that saved my life in both of these instances. And I've seen them both at HAI over the years, and I've told both of those guys, like, hey, legit, like, thank you for saving my life and me not ending up as a grease stain on a road somewhere because of the training that you guys gave. Because I mean, you ask anybody, especially law enforcement, it was pretty common. Anybody that flew a 500 would go to Western and train with those guys. They're absolutely amazing. So it's funny because you'd like to think that if something like that happens, you're just going to be totally calm and cool, and it's like not going to be a big deal. But especially being lower time, like, I'll be honest, I was completely shitting my pants. And the interesting thing is, the thing that was so overwhelming was trying to find a spot to land the helicopter. And there's a lot of debates over altitudes that you should fly at. And I'm a firm believer in this now, but we flew at 500 feet, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not illegal, it's not bad, but the downside to flying lower is you make more noise, and the community tends to not appreciate that, especially from law enforcement helicopters. But then your time in order to descend to make a good auto, it rapidly is reduced at those altitudes. So at 500 feet, you're talking maybe 12, 15 seconds from the time that you would have an engine failure to the time you're on the ground. That's not a lot of time.
No.
And if you're over a bad spot, your glide distance is also minimal. So your ability, as you get to lower altitudes, this kind of cone or area, if you want to think of it like that, that you could even physically get the aircraft to a point on the ground, it just tightens up and tightens up and tightens up as you go lower. So for us, I just remember being in a panic thinking, holy shit, like, I've got to find a place to put this thing on the ground, and then managing your rotor RPM and all that stuff, which that was another thing in the F model 500, when the engine rolls to idle, the rotor RPM would degrade more rapidly than like the D or the E models. And I'd done my initial training in a D. Now, I'd done a ton of autos in the F, but it's training in the F. It's not a big deal. But in real life, especially with that lag time, in both of these instances, I got the collective down and the cyclic back pretty quickly, and the rotor RPM had gone pretty much about to the bottom of the green, and it didn't go any lower. It stayed there, but then it slowly started to build back up, which is normal in that helicopter. But it just sucks, you know. It is what it is. So all this maneuvering, eventually we make this aggressive right hand turn again. We just barely are going to kind of come past those four-way flasher poles, and then there was a car in front of us. That dude that was cruising northbound, he just continued on, and I laugh to this day because I know that dude probably had no idea that a helicopter came down behind him. Now it wasn't like we were right on his bumper or anything, but you know, still he was probably, I don't know, maybe 75 yards ahead of us, maybe a little bit more. Hard to say at this point, but you know, he's cruising along, never saw us, like went through the green light at Spring Mountain, kept on going. But we ended up touching down in that center lane and did honestly a pretty decent auto. Slid 110 feet, came to a stop, and the only damage to the aircraft was from the skids doing this over those, you know, center turn lane divider bot dot things. It
Oh,
just
yeah.
vibrated the position lens cover on one of the skids just popped off, and that was it. And the crazy thing
Dang.
was when
Nice.
we came to a stop, um, you know, and realized, holy shit, we're okay. The first thing I realized was the engine's still running, but it's at idle, and you know the throttle is twisted fully to flight, but I mean it is all the way down at like 64%. It is legit at idle, and so I remember just totally confused. I'm like, I have no idea what's happening right now. And Dave, I gave him shit to this day because I swear to God, I feel like we didn't even stop, and that dude was already out of the helicopter, which I don't blame him. But you know, he jumps out and he's on the radio, and so I'm in the process like shit. I just got to shut this thing down. So I shut it down. Didn't do the cool down anything. Just like I just want to get out of this thing, shut it down. And the interesting thing with that was Dave had called out where he called it out. He gave good radio traffic, but he was looking off in the distance at the main intersection of Spring Mountain and Jones. And this is a teachable moment for anybody that's teaching law enforcement aviation. So Dave had never been in a helicopter for an auto rotation to that point. We had never given any of our TFOs that experience. And then in hindsight, we realized that's pretty stupid. These guys need to see what an auto is like. So in his experience, he had only ever flown airplanes. He had a private pilot's license, but he got it in an airplane. And well, an airplane glides a lot better than a helicopter. So we always talked about autos and like, you're going to call this radio traffic out and this is what you're going to say. And he did a phenomenal job of that. However, he was looking like a quarter mile away at that intersection. So he tells our dispatcher, he's like, control Air 4, you know, or he had said, he says Air 4, even though we were flying in Air 5. That was another thing that we realized is that Dave had been on nights for a while and he had been flying in Air 4 all the time. So he was just used to keying up the mic and saying Air 4. So he said the wrong aircraft call sign, which it's not a big deal. We're the only ones flying patrol and they figured it out. But then he was looking a quarter mile away and that's where he said we were going to be. And that wasn't anywhere close to where we were going to get to, but that's where he was looking. And in his mind, like, we're going to glide there. And we just realized for training that we had some stuff that we could probably clean up with the TFOs with doing EPs. And then when he got out, he said, for again, this is just good for TFOs. He jumps out and we're on Lindell, and then there's this tiny little residential street called Solvang, and nobody knows where the hell Solvang is, you know. And in hindsight, he's like, "We're gonna be at Lindell and Solvang," and she, you know, the dispatch is like, "What? You know, what is it?" She's trying to type that in to get it to verify, so everybody can come our way. And you know, again, when we debriefed it, we're like, you know, a better thing would have been to say we're going to be on Lindell south of Spring Mountain. Everybody's like, I know exactly where that's at. Those are major streets, you know. So
Yeah,
again, like
yeah.
for guys teaching TFOs, like, you know, tell them, hey, give us a reference in regards to something that the officers know and they can find it. Because if you go to Lindell south of Spring Mountain, you're going to find us. We're sitting in the street, you know. So that was kind of funny. And then one of our deputy chiefs at the time, who's you know, up there in rank on the agency, was actually sitting at the intersection of Spring Mountain and Jones and heard the radio traffic, and he's watching us descend. So he was like the second dude to arrive. Um,
Oh, wow.
but the biggest moral of this story is we get out and everybody, you know, descends upon the scene here. We're okay. Nobody's hurt or anything. A little freaked out, but they get the scene all secure. They shut the roads down, everything. And I'm just getting bombarded with phone calls from the hangar. You know, the lieutenant's coming out, maintenance supervisor's coming out, my sergeant's coming out, everybody's coming out. And the one thing I didn't do was call my wife. So, the last communication I had with her was she's on the frequency, and I tell her that we're going down. So now I'm just overwhelmed. This just happened to me, and it was a lot to process. And all these people are coming up to me asking me a million questions. When the first thing for anybody out there, especially husbands, call your wife. Okay, call your wife. Put everybody else on hold. Call your damn wife. So I didn't call her. So she didn't know for like 25 minutes if we were okay. And they actually sent, so she had to get relieved on position. She tells her supervisor, she's like, Dave just went down in Air 5 and I dropped off the radar scope. And it's funny in hindsight because when you listen to the radio traffic, I said that, and then there's like a pause, and then somebody else keys up, like one of the Canyon helicopters, and then she's like, you know, hey, Silverado, so-and-so, do you see a Metro helicopter off your right? She's like kind of annoyed almost, you know, like, what? And then we drop off the radar scope, and then he goes, negative. And then it's like silence. And then another person keys up and she has to respond. And now she's like crying as she's talking because she has to talk to the helicopter. She's the only controller on the frequency. Then she tells her supervisor, and that guy's like, shit, I got to get her off frequency. So he comes over and plugs in. And on the recording we have, they have to basically do a quick briefing. So if, like, you know, I relieve you and you're up there in the tower, you plug in, or I plug in, and then you're like, hey, you know, I got this guy's crossing this runway, I got him on short final, I got, here's the situation report. And then you're like, all right, roger that, I got it, you got it, I got it, okay. And then, you know, other person unplugs, and then that's it. So she's crying while she's giving him this quick briefing on like the sit rep, if you will. And then they get her off position, and then they're just trying to get her to the scene. And then meanwhile, that dude sends a tour helicopter from our last known position on the radar scope because they're just trying to figure out if we're okay, you know? So he sends one of the tour helicopters out there with a bunch of passengers in the back, and he eventually finds us. He's getting like vectors, you know, to where, you know, they thought we were. So eventually he finds us, and he's like, yeah, I can see it. Like it's sitting upright. They're walking around, you know, looks like they made a safe landing or whatever. So they finally get her to the scene, and she's like, you know, happy, but like pissed too at the same time. And I realized, I was like, damn, I really dropped the ball on that one, man. Like, I should have called my damn wife and told her that I was okay. So
extreme ownership again.
Yeah, extreme ownership. Yeah, it all comes always down to extreme ownership. It's my fault. But so, you know, we learned all these lessons with TFO stuff, with calling your wife, and long story short, we're all okay. Like, everything was okay.
Legion 419's on the visual, 19er left.
Allegiant 419 Las Vegas, I reduced your final approach speed, wind 110 at 13, runway 19er left, clear to land, plan to roll long and exit Alpha.
19er left and clear to land, we'll plan on Alpha, Allegiant 419.
Copy on 38 with you at the view.
Copy on 38 Las Vegas Tower, wind 110 at 13, proceed request to use caution.
Tower Missile 5, we're going down.
Las Vegas Tower, copy on 38, not sure if that was for me, at the view for the Colville.
Silverado 77, do you see Metro helicopter off your right?
Negative, 77.
Las Vegas Tower, copy on 38.
Copy on 38 Las Vegas Tower, wind 11011, proceed request to use caution.
See, that's because use caution, copy on 38.
I mean, you just show me the traffic.
135, so it's traffic Allegiant 419 rolling. I tell them to roll long to Alpha, and then that's the last landmark just checked in. Happy on 38 was the last one that checked in.
I got it.
AC.
10 Tower, landmark 61, checking in Colville, view 3000.
Las Vegas Tower, landmark 50 with you on the Colville, arrival 3000.
Silverado 76, need you to go look for a helicopter for me. Can you do that? Can you fly heading 230, and it's about 3 miles. Metro says he went down in that area.
Affirmative, Silverado 76, turn to 230.
Thank you.
Las Vegas Tower, landmark 50 with you on the Colville, arrival 3000.
Everybody on my frequency, 118.75, please. Las Vegas Tower, landmark 68, checking in Colville, 3000. Landmark 68, Las Vegas Tower, landing will be at your own risk. Landmark 68. Silverado 76, a little further south, about a 210 heading from there.
Roger that, 210. Like I said, landmark 52, landing assured, good day.
Bye. Landmark 50, tower landing will be turn ramp.
Landmark 50.
Tower Allegiant 419, taxi with you. Allegiant 419. Las Vegas Air, say again.
You want us to taxi with you or switch to 19.9?
Oh, change the other tower, 19.9.
Go to the other tower.
Sierra 76, about a 180 heading.
180.
And I think it's about 2 miles, somewhere in there.
Roger, do you know what the major cross streets are?
I have no idea.
Roger.
Any luck out there, Sierra 76?
None at the moment. Was it in this area on that now?
We think it's in that general area, maybe about anywhere from your 12 to 1 o'clock at about a mile and a half.
Roger, that'll kind of make a big orbit around here, see if I can spot something.
Thank you. Silverado 76, I heard it was D.I. and Jones.
D.I. and Jones, thank you.
Got a mobile thing.
Back to 781 with you for 19 left.
Back to 781 Las Vegas Tower, runway 19 left, cleared to land, wind 1304.
Clear to land, 19 left, taxi 781.
Okay, any other helicopters I haven't talked to yet? Any luck yet, Silverado 76?
Negative contact so far.
Yeah, D.I. and Jones is the latest I got.
Roger that, D.I. and Jones.
Okay, any other helicopters?
You want me to call you around or you want me to wait for 3?
For 3? Why don't you just wait for these guys to land? I got Silverado 76, and then I'll give it to you.
Hey, Rock?
Yeah.
I'm off your line.
Thanks, okay.
Hey, Tower 776, I got a visual on that Metro helicopter.
Okay, are they walking around it?
He skids up. I'm going to get a little bit closer. Look, I see they got Metro out here quarantining off the area. They got all the streets blocked off.
Okay, the controller working to position her husband was flying it. Can you give us info as soon as you get it?
I'm orbiting directly above them. They're out there walking around. Their skids up. It doesn't look like the helicopter's damaged. It looks like they landed safely.
Great.
Las Vegas Tower, 7 South US, Charlie, Eagle ramp for top.
For the trop, stand by just a moment. Give me 2 minutes.
Roger that.
So fast forward now a few years. This is right before I tested for sergeant the second time. So it was New Year's Eve, 2014, and I was working day shift. And New Year's Eve in Las Vegas for Metro is probably the busiest day of the year because you've got 300,000+ people that go down to the Las Vegas Strip. They start planning like literally on January 2nd. They start planning for that New Year's Eve. It's such a big event. And everybody has to work. The whole department works on New Year's Eve because of it. Most of the officers and even detectives have to put on a uniform. They have to work the Strip. It's just a massive undertaking for the department. So
Wow.
that day, I was one of a handful of officers in the air unit that were going to work day shift to cover patrol all day. So we had been sitting around and the weather was really bad. It was like a big cold front came through the area. Pretty high winds, really low temperatures, and just bad weather in general. So the helicopter we were going to fly, which was another 500, it was Air 2 at the time, it had just been getting wrapped up for a 100-hour inspection. So all the mechanics are in there finishing up this 100-hour. And when we came in the morning, we realized, okay, like weather's really, really bad, but it's supposed to improve. So we're probably not going to fly the first half of the day. And yeah, I don't know, 4 or 5 of us kind of in the pilot's office hanging out, doing whatever. And then it got to be about lunchtime. So we go grab lunch, we come back, and then at the end of lunch, checking the weather, and it's actually improved. It's kind of windy still, but it's not bad. It's just cold. So mechanics come in and they're like, hey, the 100-hour's done on Air 2. We're gonna go ahead and pull it out. We're just like signing the books and doing everything now. So you guys want to come pre-fly? So we all go out there, we pre-flight the helicopter, give it a really good look, and drag it out. Come back in the pilot's office, and I'm like, man, I'm getting cabin fever, dude. I want to go fly patrol. So talking to everybody in there, and Paul Lorenko is another phenomenal pilot in the unit. He's since retired, but he's a CFI. Paul had come up one slot before me, so he'd been in the unit maybe a year longer than I had. Really, really good dude. And a really outstanding cop and TFO, but a very experienced CFI also. So Paul's like, you want to go fly? I'm like, hell yeah, man, let's go fly. And it was one of those things where, like with the experienced guys, we always tried to TFO as much as we flew. And that's another thing for guys in law enforcement. If you work in an organization that you are a dual trained pilot and TFO, a lot of agencies don't. It's like you're a TFO or you're a pilot. But in some places like Vegas, it's both. I can't tell you how important it is for you to TFO as much as you fly, especially once you promote. When you become a sergeant, you don't have to TFO anymore. And some people look at that like, oh, you know, I'm going to fly, but I'm not going to TFO. No, man, get your ass in there and TFO. Because for one, when you don't do it, you start to suck at it. And for two, like, again, that's the equivalent of like, you know, when you're the guy in charge and you're not afraid to take the trash out and sweep the floors. The TFO job should be why you're in law enforcement aviation, not to be the pilot. Because all the exciting stuff happens when the TFO is on a hot call. When you're chasing somebody or there's like a major incident, you don't want to be the pilot. You want to be the TFO that's handling the call. So just like, that's all my advice when it comes to that stuff. But so Paul and I, you know, it's like, hey man, do you want to fly? Do you want to fly? You want to fly? I'm like, I don't care, dude. Like, I'll TFO, you know, we're going back and forth. And Paul was like really big on it. Like, he loved to TFO. He was absolutely outstanding at it, man. He would catch people all the time. So he's like, I'll TFO, man. You fly. I'm like, okay, whatever. That's cool. So we jump in the helicopter, we take off, and we immediately get this call over downtown Las Vegas in an apartment complex. And it was a dude chasing a female with a knife in the apartment complex somewhere outside. So yeah, take off, start hauling ass that way. He's getting information, you know, and I got to get frequency change from, you know, North Las Vegas to McCarran, like switch over to them. Like, so we're doing all that, you know, and again, like we've been in the unit a long time. So we're like, we worked together for a long number of years. So we're just banging this out. So we roll into this apartment complex, you know, pretty initially, like we're hauling ass. And a lot of times, like, especially in the 500 is like a race car, right? So if there was like, say, a cop in a fight or something like that, we would like roll in aggressively, like really, really aggressively, and make a ton of noise and get right on top of those guys and let them know like, hey, we are here. It's like a show of force. And then, you know, we're right on top of it and we can try to, you know, help direct traffic and call out, you know, what's going on. But in this case, because we didn't know where the guy was, I told Paul like, hey, on this entry, I'm going to give you a wide orbit of the whole complex. So it wasn't even an aggressive entry into this orbit. So we come in there, start slowing down. I roll into this gentle turn and I'm trying to keep it kind of flat so he can see. And at the time back then, we didn't have like the really good camera systems. We had a camera, like a FLIR or an infrared camera that we used at night. But the day shift guys generally didn't have a camera. So we didn't have a camera on the helicopter. So it was all with stabilized binoculars. So that was like old school how we used to do it. So, you know, we roll into this call and he's trying to find the building number. You know, he's given the building number. Hey, last seen chasing the female near building 18 or whatever. So I'm like, my job is just keep it low, wide, and flat, or, you know, wide and flat, not low. But we're at 500 feet. And he's looking for the building number. He's trying to find where this dude's chasing this lady. So in the first half of the orbit, I could hear the rotor RPM degrade slightly. Now, keeping in mind, I'm a little more hypersensitive to changes in the engine from, you know, the previous incident, which was years before, you know. But I would never say that I was like scared or anything like that. But I'm just like, I pay attention to that shit. You know what I mean? So we're in this orbit and I can hear the rotor RPM just slightly degrade. And it was the weirdest thing because it wasn't a lot, but I looked down and in the 500, it doesn't have FADEC, which is like the digital engine control, where basically like a computer is helping you manage the engine and its parameters. It's all done with like what they call PC airlines, which is just bleed air from the compressor between a fuel controller and a governor talking to each other to keep the engine at the correct speed, which is, you know, like 100% for the folks that don't fly. So like when you take off, you roll that thing up to 100%, you can set it and manually adjust it with this little switch that we call the inker dinker because it says increase, decrease. So, you know, you might have to adjust it 1% either way, but you want it right at the top of the green at 100%. So, and you check it before you take off, which we did. So we fly in there and I hear this thing degrade and I look down and the rotor RPM and the N2 section on the engine have gone from 100 to like 98. And I'm like, well, that's weird. So I go to beep it up a couple times to put it back at 100 and it just sits there. It doesn't drop, but it just sits there. It's just like frozen at 98 or so. So just as we're coming to where we've done one orbit of this apartment complex, I roll out of the turn and I flew north for just a second and I had Eastern Boulevard, which is a pretty main road in that part of town, out Paul's right door. And I just started this gentle left turn towards North Las Vegas Airport, which is kind of like at our maybe 10 o'clock. And I told Paul, I said, hey man, I got an issue with the governor. I'm going to take it back to North Las Vegas. And he, you know, he's like, Roger that. And I wasn't concerned because I'm like, whatever, it's at 98%, not a big deal. It's just whatever's going on, it's just going to be stuck there. So we'll just fly it back. So we just started this little turn and he had just said, okay, you know, whatever. And then it quits just poof, like brrr, it just spools down. And so immediately in my mind, we're in this left turn, and so I enter the auto, and I immediately go back to years before where that happened, where it was the fuel controller. And I don't know that it would have made a difference. It sounds like when they found what was broken in the fuel controller, it wouldn't have. But I'm like, I'm just going to beep this thing back up to 100%. So like I'm mashing on this inker dinker switch, trying to get it to come back alive, and it ain't. And I did that maybe for a second or two, and it's not. It's spooling all the way down. And so now we're in this left turn and we're descending, and that part of town. Another interesting thing that I learned was the older parts of a city generally have a lot more power lines, because neighborhoods that were built, 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't as common for residences to have underground power lines installed. So like the newer sections, the newer parts of a town, a lot of times you'll see on a main road, you'll see, like those 75 or, super tall main power lines. And then, everything is kind of underground at that point into neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But in the older neighborhoods, you don't, man. You just see those small wires that are just, down streets and across alleys and that stuff. And that's kind of where we were, kind of in the older downtown part of Vegas. So we make this initial left turn and kind of roll out for a second, and we're lined up on a small residential street, and there's just like cars and kids and people like everywhere. Like it looked, if I remember right, it was like a bunch of kids like playing soccer in the street, even though it was freaking cold. But just, there's a lot of people out, a lot of kids and just activity. And I'm like, that's not going to work. So lay it over hard again to the left and line up on, basically now we've descended to the point where there's really no other options. We're kind of committed. And there was one street kind of out in front of us. And then there was another, and it was a small residential street. And then there was another one just to the left of that. And those are really the only two places we could go at this point. And I can remember Paul on the radio talking, giving out radio traffic. And the area that we had to land was worse, much worse than that previous auto. It just sucked. It was what it was. But so I couldn't even hear, even though the radio was monitoring it, I couldn't even tell you what he was saying. I could just hear words being said, because I'm just totally loaded up at this point. And again, like the most stressful thing was trying to find a place to land, like literally being like, kind of in a panic almost, like just, we gotta, like, we don't have a lot of time. There's not a lot of good spots to land. So after that second turn, we're descending. I could see that final street that we're committed to, which I think it was 21st Street, if I remember right. We were descending, and there was that street kind of started, and we weren't quite going to get to where the street started. And then there was a row of houses that were perpendicular to it and perpendicular to our flight path. And between those row of houses, there was like a dirt alley that separated them with some like mid-sized power lines. And like, had we not done any more maneuvering and just kind of let the descent happen on its own, that's where we were going to end up. It's probably clipping the top of those wires and hitting a house like right there. So, and the other thing too is that, again, in that 500 with that just half a second of reaction time, I wouldn't even call it delayed, but it's just, it's human reaction time to react to the fact that the engine just flamed out. Same thing, rotor RPM is down near the bottom of the green and kind of hanging there, and it's just very, very, very slowly starting to creep its way back up. But you can hear it. And another thing that's interesting is in both of these situations, something that you don't normally get in training is like the actual indications of an engine failure. And what I mean by that is like, potential, depending on the aircraft you're flying, lights flashing, or like the audible in your ears. In the 500, it's pretty fucking loud, but it's just like beep, 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 beep. And it's, I don't know, I understand why it's so loud, but like feedback to MD, maybe you guys can back that off about 40%, because it's just like it's obvious what's happening, and that's just like sensory overload. But there's a lot going on. And so I realized, like, okay, even though I don't really want to soak up some rotor RPM, I'm gonna have to pull some collective to maneuver over these wires and clear that house and try to get on this just small road. And then the shit thing was, there was another single wire that was strung across kind of that area. So there was kind of a pocket, a small pocket, where we had to clear a big set and then try to not fly into a single one. That in my mind at the time, it looked like it was perpendicular to that small street, and it actually was not. It was actually diagonal, like 45 across it. But it just when I saw it, I'm like, shit, there's another single one. I can't hit that one either. So just kind of dragged the rotor down a little bit more again, cleared that one set. And then as we were coming up on the next one, just lowered it back again all the way, tried to slow down a bit to get some of it back. Cause I knew we had really low rotor RPM. And for the non-pilots that don't know a whole lot about auto rotation, just a simple explanation of it is that, you know, when you're a normal flight, powered flight, the engine is driving the transmission. There's a clutch that, you know, basically operates similar to like if you're pedaling a mountain bike. And if the engine stops driving the transmission, similar to you stopping pedaling the mountain bike at any time, that clutch engages and it allows it to freewheel. So like on your mountain bike, you can just coast, and the pedals not being turned does not stop the wheels from turning. Same thing in the helicopter. The clutch disengages the rotor system immediately from the engine. Well, you also have to lower the collective all the way, which flattens the pitch on the blades to pretty much, you know, basically zero, if you want to just arbitrarily call it that. And then as you're descending, that air coming up through the bottom of the rotor system turns the rotor system and helps you keep the RPM. So you're basically trading, you know, your descent is what's allowing the blades to continue to turn. And the analogy everybody gives is like when you blow in a pinwheel, kind of the same concept, right? But what happens is, in order to extend your glide or to slow your descent, you have to pull some collective and increase the pitch. Whenever you do that, it absorbs rotor RPM. And, you know, in a normal auto, in training, you know, you can turn, you can pedal turn, you can speed up, slow down, you can pull collective. You just have to stay within this arc of the green, because if you go outside of that, beyond a certain point, basically, you know, the helicopter stops flying and you can't get the RPM back. So that's one of the challenges doing autos. But in my mind, I could already hear the rotor RPM was low. I'm like, shit, I really don't want to pull more collective, but we can't hit these wires. So we maneuver over them, coming up on the next set, dump the collective, come back a little bit, which gave us a little burst of rotor RPM to try to get some back. And then we descended into this kind of pocket of wires. And as we came down through probably, I don't know, 50-ish feet, like came aft to basically flare. And at the very bottom of that maneuver, you bring the nose up, you flare the helicopter, and it reduces your forward speed. It helps build some rotor RPM, and it prepares you to be able to just make one final cushion of the landing. And ideally, like you bring the nose up, you do that, you kind of hold it. And then as you get lower, 10, 15 feet-ish, you want to push the nose flat so that the skids are level with the ground. And then as you make that last bit of descent, you just keep pulling collective, and whatever rotor RPM is left, use that to cushion the landing. Well, we didn't have a lot of rotor RPM. So like I remember coming aft and the nose comes up and we kind of hung there for a second, and we were also slightly downwind. That was another thing that didn't help. But
okay, yeah.
I pulled collective to kind of, you know, try to stop us, and like I normally would to finish that maneuver, and it just like went right to the stop, and that was it. Like I remember again thinking in my head, I was like, shit, like we're still probably 30 feet off the ground. And so, you know, that's it. Like it's pretty much done flying. So I pushed forward completely, like to try to get the disc level. And I remember it was just kind of like, it's the weirdest thing. Like if, you know, normally you don't hear, the engine is pretty much quiet at that point, and the RPM is like so low. It's just like guys that fly, especially in, you know, just done lots of autos, like you hear it, you know, and it's kind of creepy when it's at its lowest, but it's like even lower than that. So it's just kind of like, it's just low. And so I push forward to try to get us flat, and it's just kind of shuddering, and the nose starts to come down, but it was done at that point. It just stopped flying. So maybe 20, 25 feet, we just fall tail first. Thank God we did not quite get to that wire, the next one, but we descended tail first like that. The tail hit, and then it kind of whipped the rest of us flat. And the impact sheared the tail boom off, and then we split the skids. And then actually as we slid, that one, I think we slid like 98 feet. And then we rotated to the right around almost 180 degrees, not quite 180 degrees, but significant impact. And one of the main rotor blades actually departed the head and went down the road and was bent like 90 degrees. The tail section went flying and ended up in this guy's yard, took out a section of his iron fence. And interestingly enough, there was a guy who lived there, a family that lived there, and the son was vacuuming out his car. And he had some headphones on. He's listening to music and he was vacuuming his car. And I guess he had the music cranked up and he couldn't hear it. But here comes our tail section, bang, takes out the fence, like goes right by him and ends up in the yard. And he has no idea. He's just like jamming away, vacuuming his car. No idea. And then, we go sliding past him, doesn't see anything. And then there was 2 citizens sitting in a U-Haul truck parked next to a dumpster on the other side of the street. And this is a small street. Like I'll send you some pictures of it. There's not a lot of room.
Yeah, please do.
And we slid basically right up to where those guys were. Like they ended up diving for cover in the U-Haul, and we ended up stopped right next to that dumpster. And then the father of the guy vacuuming his car, heard something, and he opens the door. Apparently, like we read a bunch of statements on it, after the fact, and he's like, hey, like he points to the helicopter crash, and the guy just like looks over and is like, holy shit, like where'd that come from, But
oh my God,
it was the thing that stood out the most for me was the impact. Like it was a significant impact. It was brutal. And as soon as we hit the ground, I just remember feeling like massively intense pain in my back, and a couple seconds of kind of nothing. In hindsight, realized I kind of, I don't know, I guess the impact just kind of knocked. I guess lost consciousness for a second or two, because I just came to sitting in the thing. And again, like now I'm sitting there, I'm in like horrendous pain. I ended up breaking, I had compression fractures in my lower back, L1 and L2. And then I ended up with a fracture in my arm right here too, which I didn't find out until days later. But, I pulled the collective up and my arm was like this. And then it came down and slammed into the metal frame at the base where the collective goes into the airframe. And then I had actually, because my feet were on the pedals and, my body was isolated since I was flying, we hit so hard that I actually snapped the pedals off, like literally broke the aluminum that connected the pedals to the like push control rods, snapped them off.
Oh my God.
And yeah, thank God didn't break my legs or my ankles, but my back took the brunt of the damage. And so now we're sitting there, I kind of come to, and same thing, like, the system and the helicopter is just like beep, 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 it's going crazy. And Paul gets out, and he actually had a small fracture in part of the vertebrae of his neck. But he gets out, man, comes around, opens the door, and he actually says on the radio, you can hear it on the radio traffic. He's like, "Get out, Dave." Dude, I was done. I was in so much pain. I could not get out of that thing on my own. My back hurt so bad. So he comes around, he opens the door. He's like, "Get out." I'm like, I can't move. So, dude, total stud. He takes my harness off, helps pull me out, carries me over to the sidewalk, and lays me down on my back. And people are starting to come out, and he's like shooing them away. And like, I remember kind of looking up, and because you could hear the helicopter, the system knew that the engine had failed, and it legit failed this time. So the auto reignition system had kicked on and was trying to reignite the engine. So there's 2 igniters in the F model, and they're firing. So like I could hear it, like we could smell fuel, and we could hear the igniters just like firing. We're not that far away from it. And Paul realized, he's like, shit, like this thing could catch on fire. So he gets back up, he runs over there, pulls the emergency fuel shut off, shuts the master battery off, yells at some more people to get away, comes back over, and he crouches down next to me. And it's kind of funny, like now we've laughed about it a lot, but I remember like I just kind of looked up, and I was in so much pain, and like it's freezing, and I legitimately learned what it means to go into shock because I was so cold anyway. But I just started like jackhammering, shivering, man. I was like just in pain. It was friggin' cold. But I looked up, and you could hear sirens, and Paul's like kind of crouched down next to me, and I go, dude, the helicopter's completely destroyed. I swear to God, my back is broken. Like, how the fuck are you up walking around right now talking to people? And I think it just finally like sunk in to Paul, because he literally just kind of like leaned over and he kind of groaned. He's just like, ugh. He just like leans over, and there we are, dude. I'm on the sidewalk. He's in the gutter. and that's it. And
my God.
so the kind of sad thing about it was nobody came to help us, and we're in not the greatest part of town. And I now, being much older and maybe a little bit wiser, I'd like to think that it was just because people were just overwhelmed and they had no idea what to do. But nobody came up and even was like, "Hey, are you okay?" Like nothing, dude. It was just Paul and me in the street, and people were calling in, 911. But the radio traffic is pretty interesting to listen to now, because it took them a little while to find us. Even with Paul, gave outstanding radio traffic. I mean, the most calm, and I'll send that to you too. It's amazing. It still to this day amazes me how calm he was when he just calls out. He's like, "Hey, control, Air 2, 444, which is like our call for, like, that's the worst call to hear on the radio. It's basically an officer needs help, emergency."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Hey, we're going to be making an emergency landing at, we're going to be at, this and this, and go ahead and, roll medical." And then bang, we hit the ground. And it was so calm. And like the joke I've said a million times is that day, we were trying to decide who's going to go fly, and it's like, "You want to fly? You want to fly? Oh, I'll fly, whatever." And so I've always told Paul and everybody else, I said, "Hey, if Paul would have been flying and I would have been the TFO, like the landing might have been better, but the radio traffic would have been way worse, man. If I was TFO, it would have not have been as good as Paul. Paul was just like so calm and just dialed, man. But he did such a good job. And then he gets me out. Like that dude is like a true hero in my mind, because he just was chill. And you don't know how people are going to react when shit really goes downhill. You just don't know how you're going to react. And I mean, he was just totally calm and a stud. So anyway, they ended up finding us, and they like, first cop pulls down the street, and even you can tell that guy's pretty overwhelmed. So I realized, like, going back to the first one, I'm like, shit, I need to call my wife, right? So I'm like, I'm trying to get my flight suit. I pull my phone out, and now people are starting to show up. Like the first cop shows up, and that dude's just like, "Man, they didn't train me for this. Like active shooter, like, robbery, vehicle pursuits, like fights, I'm good. But like helicopter crashes where our own dudes are messed up, I didn't get trained for that." So he's just kind of like, they're all trying to figure it out. They're shutting down the streets, but I pull my phone out and I call Ashley, and we now have two little kids. We have two girls at the time, and they're like 1 and 2 basically, 1 and 3 basically. They're just very little. And so she's trying to get him to go to sleep for a nap. And so I call, she answers the phone, and right away, she doesn't know we're flying. She picks up the phone, doesn't even say hello. She's just like, "Hey, can I call you back? Like, I'm trying to get the girls to go down for a nap, and like, they're not cooperating. They're being a real pain." And just like, she's going on and on. And finally I'm like, "No, just crashed in the helicopter, and, like, we're in the street," or something like that. And then the call dropped. And that was it. And it's like beep, beep, beep. I'm like, shit, the call dropped. And then at that point, somebody comes up, grabs my cell. Like the medics start to show up, the Vegas FD guys. They're like, "Give me that." They're like, "Take his gun away." That's the first thing they do when a cop's hurt, is like, get the gun away from him so he doesn't go nuts and pull it out. So like they take my phone, they take my gun. They're just like trying to package me. I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, dude, somebody's gonna call my wife back and tell her what happened. Okay, that's twice. Like at least they called her. But yeah, they ended up,
Dave.
and my neighbor Brian at the time lived 2 doors down, and he was a SWAT officer at the time. Super solid dude. They knew, because everybody's working. They heard the broadcast, go out area wide, like the whole department, like that. Hey, air unit just went down. There's a 444 on downtown. So he was at home getting ready to go to work, and he like literally ran right over to our house, and my wife was calling somebody to come watch the kids. And as soon as that person showed up, our friend Nikki, to watch our girls, Ashley jumped in the truck with Brian, and he rolled, code all the way to the hospital. So she knew. And then, she calls the hangar to try to get an update, and they're like, "We don't know. We just know that they're being transported." Like, like they really didn't have any info, but thank God, like, we were hurt. But able to go back to work. I think Paul and I are both out for 6 months, and then got healed up and went back to work, flew for a bit. And then that was when I was studying for the second sergeant's test. Once I was able to and wasn't, sitting home on pain pills, just trying to survive with broken back. But yeah, interesting, man. So, it's like, dude, I don't know. I'm either the luckiest or the unluckiest guy that you're going to fly with. I feel like the luckiest because, those
I'm
were
going luckiest
incidents, thank God didn't vapor lock and just, put it into the back of that guy's house. But yeah, in my mind still, Paul is the real hero in that incident because he was just so calm. I was definitely on the inside, did not feel calm. Yeah.
bro.
But I called my wife, so that's a win.
Well done, sir.
Yeah.
It's funny. You've told me that story at least twice, and every time I'm blown away. It's just mind blowing to me. Well done.
Well, I tell you what, man. If nothing else, it's just, to me, it shows the value of good training. Really, that's all it comes down to. To me, it wouldn't have mattered which one of our pilots would have been flying that day. The outcome would have been the same. They would have made a better landing probably than I did, even with the crappy area that we had to land. But that's just a credit to the training. If you have good training, man, that's, everybody says it, but that's what you're going to fall back to. And anytime it's overwhelmingly stressful, whatever the situations that you're put in, you kind of have to operate on autopilot. So you go back to whatever your foundation of training was. And thank God that's what happened to me. But that goes back to how I was trained in Vegas with Metro for years. And then honestly, like MD, we did all of our autos with MD for the last several years. And then the guys at Western, Pete and Bob, all those guys collectively are what kept us alive. So yeah, thanks again to those guys.
Controller 2, just be advised, we're going to have to do emergency landing. We're just west of Eastern and try to get you straight here. And give us a red 444 and roll medical.
Yes, good red for Air 2, 444.
Get out, Dave.
Air 2, cross street when you can. Air 2, location when you can. And you on channel able to give Air 2's location?
Baker 34, looked like that went down somewhere around northwest of Bonanza and Eastern.
Copy Bonanza and Eastern.
Charlie 20 code. Baker 5, recode. 24 same. 751, clear the radio until we find them.
Copy, channel's clear, 1330.
Keep the red, keep the guys off the air. Baker 45, we're 23rd. 23rd, just north of Bonanza.
Copy, 23rd and Bonanza.
Control, roll medical. Expedite.
Copy, they've been advised.
Control. Adam 1, we need a perimeter up. We need units at Bonanza and 23rd, units at 23rd and Wilson. Okay, we need to start putting up tape for these guys.
Badass, man. Badass. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Dude, thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. I'm glad we got it down, and everybody else, I hope, can get something out of it as well. So, speaking of training, if you've got a little more time, I'd love to dive into a little bit of SR3 Rescue Concepts and your training class. But if you don't mind, I'd like to start with actually why it's called SR3 and how you got into it.
Yeah, so basically, it was founded by myself and Jason Connell, who is one of my best friends, search and rescue officer in Vegas. And Jason is also since retired. He retired 2 weeks after I did. We were in the same academy, in the same platoon in the academy. Just an outstanding human being. And basically, we had one of our very closest friends in search and rescue, a guy named Dave Van Buskirk, that he went up to search and rescue. I think Dave went to SAR a month before I went to air support. And I met Dave on the department early on, we were both firearms instructors, and I met him when we were teaching an academy class, and we ended up kind of in a small group of instructors with a portion of the class from the academy. So I got to know him there, and I was just super impressed with him, man. The guy just carried himself so well. He was so well spoken and so humble, and just such a nice human being. You know, just unfortunately not the type of person that you run into on a daily basis. Just a genuinely good person that always cared more about, you know, everybody else. And it was interesting because like you pick up on that right away. Like, man, this guy's different, man. He's just, you know, always asking, hey, how are you doing? Like, how was your day? Like, what was going on? Like, did you hit that traffic? You know, like just always asking about other people, and never talking about himself. And that's just not common. You know, like we just tend to not do that. We always talk about ourselves, and Dave never did that. So I met him there, and then I was really big for years into jiu-jitsu, and I had been going to a jiu-jitsu gym for, I don't know, year and a half maybe. And Dave comes walking in one day to our jiu-jitsu gym just out of the blue. And I think I talked to him about it when I ran into him somewhere, and he was like, yeah, I want to come down there and start training, you know? So he comes in, and I remember laughing, telling him like, dude, you're way too good looking to come in here and get your face smashed with the rest of us. You know, like, I don't have that problem, but like, you're gonna come in here, your ears are gonna get beat to shit. Like, you're gonna go home with black eyes. Like, your wife Adriana's gonna be pissed. You're gonna come in with a bloody nose, black eye, you know. But he's like, oh man, like I'm gonna train, you know. So that was when we really started spending time together, was training. And then his ultimate goal at the time was to go to SAR. My ultimate goal was to go to Air Sport, and we were working on that kind of simultaneously. And awesome that he transferred up there, and then I transferred up right behind him, and then Jason transferred up a couple years after we did. And one of the things about Dave that'll tell you about his character was that in jiu-jitsu, you know, it's a phenomenal sport. I can't say enough about it, but it's one of those things that, like, if you're going to hit the level of achieving a black belt, it's extremely difficult. I mean, if you put the time and effort into it, it's definitely attainable. But a lot of people don't achieve that level because of just the commitment and just, quite honestly, like the massive bashing that your ego has to take by getting your ass kicked for years, you know, and then being willing to learn and put aside the things that you're not good at to get better in order to achieve the level that you need to, you know, be hopefully awarded a black belt someday by somebody. And the gym that we went to, ran by Sergio Pena in Vegas, was where we trained. And Sergio is, I mean, an absolute legend in the jiu-jitsu community, and very well respected, and somebody that, you know, I mean, he takes jiu-jitsu very seriously, and, you know, doesn't give belts out for free. I mean, you earn a belt from Sergio no matter at what level. And to earn a black belt from Sergio Pena is amazing. And I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but I want people to understand how humble Dave was. Well, Dave had been training for, I want to say it had been like 8 years. I'd have to go back and look, but, you know, kind of the standard is like to get a black belt in less than 10 years in jiu-jitsu is it's a pretty big deal. And he had been a brown belt for some time, and I think I just got my brown belt, maybe close to it, or was like high purple at the time. We were close. I want to say maybe he'd been brown, and then I just got my brown. But either way, he comes into work one day, and I'd been there working day shift, and they came in at noon. So he comes in, and we're talking and chatting. I'd been around hanging out with him for like an hour or so. We used to, you know, work out a lot at work whenever we could. And I started getting messages on my phone because he had been to class that morning, and guys start texting me. They're like, dude, DVB, that's what we call them for Dave and Busker. They're like, DVB got his fucking black belt today. That's badass. And like my phone, I'm getting all these messages. I'm like, holy shit. And I'm in the pilot's office, and I've just been talking to him for like an hour. So I run down to his office. I was like, did you get your fucking black belt today, dude? And he's like, oh yeah, you know, like Sergio gave me my black belt. And I'm like, dude, you know what a big deal that is? Like, why didn't you say anything? And he's like, oh, I don't know, man, you know, like, but to Dave, like, that was just a personal thing. And that was just a journey for him. And he was not the guy that was going to tell everybody that he just got his black belt. I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, anybody that trains understands what a massive achievement that is. And it didn't matter to him to have to tell all of us. I don't want to say that he didn't care, because he absolutely did. I mean, he absolutely treasured the fact that he earned that black belt, and from all people, from Sergio Pena. But he was so humble. He didn't feel a need to tell a soul about it. I don't even know if he told his wife at work. He probably did, but I was just blown away. I'm like, holy shit, man. Like, I hate to say it, but I'd be like, I just got my fucking black belt. He just gave it to me. I can't believe it. But he just was that way. So anyway, we worked alongside for, several years in SAR, and then he knew my goal was to become a rescue pilot. And then I was in training to be a rescue pilot, and working towards all that stuff. And, had gone on a bunch of training flights with him. We used to come back and just laugh all the time, be like, man, I can't believe that, like, you're in the back and I'm flying and, like, going to be flying you on rescues and stuff. It's just crazy. Like, when we think back to so many years ago, and our goals were just to get the air support in SAR. So, Dave's call sign was SR3 in 2013. The guys are all numbered in order of seniority, SR1, SR2, SR3. So he was SR3 at the time. And essentially what happened was there was a rescue that was in the middle of the summertime up in Mount Charleston. There was a single adult hiker that went up and went on a trail that had been closed because there was a whole bunch of fires that had occurred that year, really bad fires up there in the whole mountains areas. A whole bunch of it had been closed down. So he basically, unfortunately, went hiking on a trail that was closed by himself, got up there, hiked all the way up near the top, kind of like the sun went down and he wanted to get down. So he descended off trail a couple thousand feet, ended up getting ledged out at like the 8,600 foot mark, and he called. So they go out there in the Huey to get him. And Dave was the primary rescuer on the call. They flew out there and they actually had briefed on the way out, like, hey, this is, it's a nighttime hoist, but, the weather's pretty good. It's going to be kind of a clear cut rescue, like, but hey, let's not put our guard down type of a thing. So they flew out there and essentially they lowered Dave down, and because the rotor disc was going to be close to the base of the kind of the rock face that met the ledge this guy was standing on. He was standing on a fairly small ledge, but enough room for a couple people to work and walk around on. But they get in there, they located him, and they're like, all right, hey, we're going to come into a hover. We're going to insert Dave. And normally, they would disconnect from the hook, let the guy do his work. We would come back in and come to a new hover. But they said, hey, because we're going to be so tight on the terrain here, let's just insert Dave. We'll direct deploy him, so he'll stay on the hook. Back then, things were much different. We had a non-locking hoist hook that we weren't aware we should have not probably been using overland. And then they were going to use the strop for a mountain rescue, which, again, it just comes down to you don't know what you don't know. But mountain rescue should not be completed with a strop. It has its applications over water, but overland it's not one of them. So basically, they inserted Dave and they said we're going to leave him hooked up, strop the victim, double up, extract them both out. So they did that, and when they made the pick, essentially his carabiner with this non-locking hoist hook, because the strop went on the hook first, and then Dave's carabiner was on secondary. Both on the same main portion of the hook, but that's how they rigged it for the insertion. So when there was the slack in the cable where he was working, his carabiner rotated into that position for a dynamic rollout, and we weren't really aware of what that was at the time in the unit, unfortunately. And so essentially what happened was when they made the pick and they put tension on the cable, it held for just a second or two, and then they had briefed to slowly start to drift off the terrain to get some relief from it, and then fly out of the canyon as they extracted both of them. And unfortunately, within a second or two, it popped the gate and he fell a couple hundred feet to his death. And it was a terrible accident. And we actually we have a whole presentation that Jason and I did that the department had to approve that we gave at the Rescue Summit a couple years after it happened. And we're always telling people, hey, if you want a copy of it, we'll send it to you. If you want us to present it to you, like, call us, we'll do it for free. It's just for the awareness of it. But yeah, basically it sucked because it was a preventable accident with dynamic rollout. And Dave was literally the best operator that unit has ever seen. And I would stand by that until the day I die. I mean, he legitimately, like, he went out and even though it wasn't required, he obtained his paramedic certification. And the guys, they had to get like an intermediate EMT after a certain amount of time. But he was the first guy to go out there and on his own dime, his own time, he became certified as a paramedic because he wanted to be able to push meds for these people that were just really, really hurt. And, if we couldn't get a helicopter in because of the winds or the weather, he wanted to actually give them a higher level of care. And he set a standard. So guys after him, like Jason did it. There's a couple other guys in the unit right now that are paramedics because of that. Just like leading by example. But I mean, he would always be out there working and training. And if guys that were newer, were struggling with certain things, he would grab them and say, "Hey, let's go out on the climbing tower. Let's rig, up a rope system. Let's go work on this. Let's work on that." Really like what he cared the most about was just making everybody around him better. And, by default, it's awesome because the team would get better, which, then everybody, wins together and we're more capable and we succeed. But God, he was just such an outstanding human being. And just literally, I mean, he was the best guy. And it was crazy because if that could happen, it really shocked us to the best guy in the unit. It just made us realize like, holy shit, out of all the guys that this could have happened to on that type of a rescue, we lost Dave. So basically Jason Connell was in SAR and just, I mean, it tore him up. I mean, Jason, unfortunately, was the first guy inserted later on by a second crew when they found Dave's body. And Jason with his sergeant, Gavin Vesp at the time, they had to basically document and recover him and bring him home. And, terrible for anybody to have to do that. And he was extremely close to Dave, just like I was. I mean, he worked with him even more than I got to because they're in the same unit. So, I mean, those guys were super attached at the hip. And Jason really, he had this burning desire inside of him to fix everything. And Metro was an outstanding unit, but we had fallen behind the times. And we had stopped sending people to conferences. We had stopped, really looking outside of our own bubble to try to see if there was better ways or better things. And we just, fell into this kind of fatal trap of not getting training. And it was a mentality from what I feel like was just a lot of the much older experienced people and some of our leadership at the time. So that, in my opinion, is what caused that accident to occur. But Jason was just, I mean, relentless, where he just went on this mission to try to fix everything, to find what we could do better and to try to implement it. And I mean, the dude was tireless, going and trying to find anybody, in the organization that, within our agency in SAR and air support that would listen to him. And one of the things that he felt strongly is that he wanted the story to be told, for one, not only to respect Dave, but to prevent anything from happening like that again, if people were using non-lock and hoist hooks. So we put together a class, a PowerPoint that was just a factual explanation of the accident and then the factors that we thought that were involved that caused it. And then we talked about dynamic rollout, and our staff had to approve it, but we eventually got permission like 2 years later to present that at the APSA Rescue Summit. And we gave copies of that to anybody that wanted it. We had them put on thumb drives in advance. So that kind of started the whole, we thought we should just like go around and, talk about this. So we had done that. We were going around and we had some opportunities to speak about it. And then we just realized like, there's only a couple of training companies out there and they're good, they're outstanding, but there's not a lot of options out there for training. And we felt like at the time between Jason and I, and then guys like yourself and, just other guys that we have and in our kind of, circle of guys that do this work that have so much experience, we thought, man, we feel like we had a lot to offer. And so we thought, well, we're going to start a training company and we're going to name it in Dave's honor. So we're going to name it SR3 Rescue Concepts. So that's how we ended up being SR3. And, it meant a lot to us to be able to go out and have an opportunity, especially with hoist rescue, to try to teach people to do that as safely and as efficiently as possible. And that's been our mission. We teach more than hoist rescue, but a lot of what we teach is hoist rescue. And it's just awesome because I know that, if I was able to sit down and have a beer with Dave for 5 minutes, he'd probably laugh his ass off and be like, "What are you guys doing? You work so hard," But I think he would be really stoked that, it's because of him that, out of the ashes of that tragedy, if you will, that, something hopefully kind of beautiful came out of it. And that's really the only way you can look at something like that. Because it friggin' stings, man, when you lose somebody, especially that you're close to. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people listening to this podcast know exactly what I'm talking about, but it hurts, man. It cuts deep. So that was the motivation behind it. And we've been rolling strong for several years now. And it's been really good.
Well, you and I have had a good time together. So I've appreciated it. And I'm glad that we can drop some knowledge to people. And the slogan of SR3, you don't know what you don't know. And for those that have been out there doing it the same way for the past 20 years, there's a lot of new techniques. There's a lot of new gear. There's a lot of new equipment. There's a lot of new things that you can learn. Don't be afraid to have somebody come in. And you know what, Dave, I'll back it up. SR3 is not the only training company out there.
No.
But you can go get good training. You can. Get somebody else's opinion. Get an outsider's view of what you're doing.
I stand by that. I have always said that. There's other options out there. We have direct competitors out there that we compete with all the time for work, but you know what? They're all good guys. Those companies are outstanding too. And that's all that matters. And we always tell people that, like, just get training. It doesn't matter if it's from us or one of the other companies. Just go out there, man. They're going to give you good training. But the fact that you're seeking it out and either getting good initial training or good advanced training, or just getting somebody to come out and take a look at your organization and making sure that you haven't fallen into that kind of fatal trap of not having anybody take a look at your procedures and your gear and everything that you're doing to make sure that there's something that potentially could save a life. And I'm always super impressed by an agency that especially if they don't have a lot of funding for something like that, but they understand how important it is to bring somebody in, because it is, the crappy thing is that's not the accident that never happens is not something that's quantifiable or trackable.
Right.
You don't know how many accidents you've avoided by having good training, but nevertheless, like it's just critical.
Well, it's cool because like you and I actually talked about it. You and I had a lecture on it, and it was the gosh, I forget the name of the presentation.
Practice.
What we talked the practice of rescue. That's right. And they call it a practice of medicine for a reason, because they practice to save lives every day. And what one medication worked 20 years ago, they no longer use. They're using something else. Well, rescue is along the same lines. Just because it was 20 years ago the shit worked doesn't mean you should be doing it today. There are things that are advanced and better things out there. And I think one of our favorite is using a jungle penetrator in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, don't do that. I mean, shit, our guys are doing that, 20 years ago. Man. The first time I ever got hoisted was sitting on that friggin' jungle penetrator. And I think back now, dude, I had no idea. It was like ignorance is bliss. But yeah, that's not, everything has its purpose. And it's hard to put your ego aside and think, these folks are going to come in here and tell us how to do our job. And that's not how, any of these companies operate. It's certainly not how we operate.
Right.
We're always very humble and respectful, and I always tell people that, like, hey, we're a guest in your house, and that is not lost on us. We're thankful for the invitation to come into your house and, hopefully respectfully, give you guys some good training and some recommendations. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of better ways to do things that are safe. Yeah. You hit it spot on.
The greatest. Yeah, totally. And one of the greatest parts about that I've enjoyed working with you and stuff is when we go into a place is we're taking feedback from them too. And all of a sudden we're learning something that we can now pass on to the next person. I remember going to a class and I can't remember if it was with you or not, but all of a sudden head signals were in it. Like up is yes and down is no. And like, oh, this is great. So
yes, like no to hell. That's what he says.
Yeah, exactly. But those are little things that you're like, oh, this is a great idea. They came up with a great idea. Let me pass it on to others that don't know. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
You're willing to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing that always impresses me with all the people on our team is that everybody is extremely, extremely experienced in what they do, but they're also extremely humble, and they understand that we are always learning. Myself, all of you guys, and we're trying to, again, this kind of goes back to like honoring DVB, and that was how he ran. And the guys that are on our team, they understand that, like, that's expected on SR3. It's like, you should be trying to make yourself better all the time. It never stops, and then our organization gets better. And, by default, we're hopefully providing the best service that we can to the people that bring us out. But yeah, it's huge, man. Like we take away every time we go somewhere. Every time I go teach a class, I learn stuff from people, and it's amazing. It's outstanding. We're all growing together. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yep. So thanks. All right, I want to talk just one more quick thing, maybe an additional question on the end, but you've said it twice throughout here, and you said, "Oh shit," in the aircraft. So this is something that you and I brief quite often. There's two things you don't say in the aircraft. It's oh shit, no fuck. All right, don't do that. And if you are, it better be followed up with what that oh shit or what that oh fuck is.
Yeah, no, that's a valid point. Yeah, because the people that are not directly, experiencing the oh shit like you are, they need a little bit of peace of mind. So yeah, right away, try not to say it, but obviously if you have to, you need to let everybody know what's going on. So yeah, that's
Totally.
I'm a believer in that. Absolutely.
And the way we can put it to everybody, like to relate to something, is when you're in the kitchen and maybe somebody's in the living room and you yell, "Oh shit," and there's nothing. It just goes silent. And you're like,
Yeah.
is everything, you're waiting for a cry, a crash, a break, a something. Can you follow that up with something? Oh
Yeah.
shit, I just dropped something down the sink. Oh, okay, I can get that.
Yeah. A little more information would be useful.
Yeah, just a little. Just a little.
Hey, spot on, dude.
Oh, it's funny. All right, Dave, last question, and then we're done. I promise. I've had you on for a long time. Is all the training that you've done, all the flying you've done, an amazing career, the stories, I love them. A piece of advice that you would like to pass on to everybody that just resonates with you, what would you tell everybody out there?
Honestly, I guess I can't give just one, but I'll give you a little mini package. And we've talked about most of this stuff, but be humble, always be humble. But you need to never stop trying to improve yourself and push yourself. And then take all of that and pour into everybody around you, the people you work with, your family, your friends. But in our line of work, the people that have always impressed me the most were the people that have done that have tried to make themselves as good as they can be for the better of the team, but that, have also tried to pass that knowledge on. I've worked with some people over the years that were incredible pilots, a couple of them that were some of the best pilots I've ever flown with, but they never were really down to share a whole lot of information because their ego was so big that they just didn't want anybody to get close to the level of skill that they had, which to me is the most selfish and irresponsible thing you could ever do, especially when you're working in an environment where that could save another pilot's life. So I don't know, to me, that's it. You got to stay humble, but you got to find the stuff that you need to improve on or that you can learn to make yourself better. And then just put that into everybody around you, man. And you honestly, if you do that and you have a good attitude in life and you work hard, like there's literally nothing you can't do. But think about it. Anybody that's like that, you want to be around those people. You want to work with those. Those are the people I want to come work for me, and not everybody's like that, especially this day and age. But that's my advice, man. Just, 100%.
Dude, I like it. Dave, thank you so much for coming on. I know I had you off for a long time, but these stories are well worth it. I look forward to the next training class we get to do together and the next beer we get to. Actually, for us, it's a bourbon. A bourbon on the rocks. Maybe even neat. You know what I'm saying?
Neat for me.
I'm okay with that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I appreciate it, brother. It's always an honor to be on this show. And I feel like I'm kind of treading among giants because you've had some really, really, really impressive folks on here that pale in comparison to anything that I've ever sat here and talked to you about. But yeah, it's humbling to be on here, man. I can't thank you enough for it. Huge fan of everything that you're doing. So yeah, I look forward to, we're going to get to hang out soon, go do some work and have that glass of bourbon. So yeah, thanks again, brother. And thanks to everybody listening. Really appreciate you putting up with us and look forward to seeing you soon, brother.
Awesome. Me too. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here. Go. Now it's time for me to pull chocks and take off. But before I go, I'm always looking for the memorable rescues that people have done. If you have one that you're willing to share or know somebody who has a story, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to highlight it here at The Real Rescue. For everybody that is standing by for that SAR alarm, remember, those in distress are praying for a miracle. They are going to get you. So until next time, fly safe and swim hard. Thank you for joining me today here at the Real Rescue Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. We'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Dave, I got to ask you, man, how did you get your Instagram handle name of Aerial Bacon?
It's a great question. So simply what happened was after the accident that we had with the engine failure, I was sitting at home and hurt, and I don't know, it was maybe a week later, and I get on the website for the local newspaper, and I'm reading a story that they did about it. And this was back when they had comments, like the public could get on there and make comments, right? And so people were just letting us have it, just all the cop haters are just on there, just, savagely just putting bad comments on there. And I was getting really fired up. And, there's people writing nice stuff too, but a lot of just negative stuff because it was the police, And so one guy gets on there and, we ended up next to a dumpster, and one guy's like, oh, it's too bad they didn't, land in the dumpster where they belong. And then another guy gets on there and he writes, I guess pigs really can't fly. And I was like, man, initially I get so mad. Right. And my wife, I told her, I was like, man, this dude wrote, pigs can't fly on the comments or whatever. And, she's laughing. She's like, you're an idiot. I don't know why you'd even read those comments. Yeah. All right. That's, to be fair, that's a good point. But anyway, I kind of laughed about it. I'm like, yeah, whatever. It's, people are going to say what people are going to say. But later on, with social media, with my Instagram handle, a couple of the guys on the team were just giving me static because, I use social media, but it's not a huge part of my life. So I had some lame, whatever, initials or something for my Instagram handle. And they started giving me a lot of static over it. You got to come up with something cool and unique or original. And I'm not super creative in that regard. So I just was thinking about it. And then I don't know why, but for some reason that dude and whatever his comment about not being able to fly popped into mind. And I'm like, I'm going to embrace what this dude wrote. And I'm going to literally call myself Aerial Bacon, the flying pig. And it stuck. So, so now, your buddy Joey painted an amazing flying pig on the back of my helmet at HAI last year. Did that in one sitting, and we got some cool pictures and video of it. And it's on the back of my helmet now. And yeah, awesome. I feel like that's the way to handle that situation. When somebody comes after you with a little bit of hate like that, you just embrace it and you use it. You don't let it bother you. So that's the story of Aerial Bacon.